The wreck drifted silently through the dark vacuum near the edge of the Virexen Nebula, its once proud hull scarred, scorched, and lifeless, or so it seemed. The alien coalition known as the Accord had finally found it. The HSS Wrathborn, a name that still stirred fear among the elder war veterans of the stars. A Terran warship from the last great conflict, lost for years, abandoned and forgotten in the shadowy reaches of space. To the Virexens and their allies, this was a prize beyond measure. They had fought the humans decades ago, and though peace was signed with ink, it had been sealed with bitter blood. The Terrans vanished after the war, retreating to their territories and closing all communication. But their weapons, their machines, and their terrifying warships were still studied, feared, and whispered about. Now, with the Wrathborn adrift and unresponsive, the Accord believed they had their chance to study one of humanity's most dangerous tools. A science vessel, Verity's Eye, docked cautiously with the warship, and a small team of scientists and security personnel boarded its dark corridors. Dr. Lurex, a leading Virexen biotechnologist, led the expedition with pride and excitement burning in her hearts. Her tendrils twitched with anticipation as her scanning drones hovered beside her, searching for life signs or remaining defense systems. There were none, at least none they could detect. Lights were dead, systems unpowered, and the ship's engines cold. The Wrathborn appeared well and truly dead. Its interior was vast, metallic, and full of eerie silence. The team moved slowly, marveling at the sleek, brutal design of human engineering. Panels were layered in titanium weave alloys, walls showed signs of controlled burns, and doors looked thick enough to withstand small explosions. "We're inside the beast," Lurex whispered into her recorder, her voice full of awe. "This ship is like nothing we've seen before. It's asleep, waiting, a relic of war and rage." She didn't know how close to the truth she was. Hours passed. The team split into smaller groups to begin examining the control decks, armory, engine rooms, and neural hub. One group entered the bridge, a massive chamber lined with cold, black screens. They tried to access the controls, but the system didn't respond. That was when one of the younger scientists, a Grell named Voro, suggested bypassing the ship's AI directly through the neural core. "It's the fastest way to understand how they program this thing," he said confidently. Lurex gave a hesitant nod. "But be careful. Don't trigger anything." They descended into the ship's lower levels, where thick coils of wiring and strange Terran technology surrounded the neural core chamber. The walls here felt tighter, closer, almost like they were pressing inward. As Voro connected his interface tool to the dormant core, the rest of the team watched the readouts. Nothing happened at first. Then, without warning, a faint pulse ran through the cables. The lights flickered once, just once, but it was enough to make everyone freeze. "Did anyone touch a power relay?" Lurex asked, her voice shaking. No one had. Then the lights came on again, this time brighter, and they stayed on. A low hum filled the air, like something ancient stretching its limbs. The door behind them slammed shut. "What was that?" someone shouted. "It's just a glitch," Voro said quickly, but his voice trembled. Suddenly, screens along the wall flickered to life, showing fragments of video, battles, explosions, soldiers running through corridors, and human captains shouting orders. One of the videos paused on a close-up of a woman's face, strong, weathered, eyes like steel. "Captain Sarah Holt," a voice said. It was not a voice from any of their team. It came from the ship itself, smooth, emotionless, and in perfect Virexen. "Captain Holt," it repeated, "deceased, legacy retained, memory archived." Lurex stepped back. "The ship is awake." More doors closed. Emergency lights blinked red. Gravity adjusted slightly. The floor under their feet shifted, just a few degrees, but enough to throw off their balance. "This is a human defense protocol," Voro whispered. "It's testing us." The voice returned. "Welcome, unauthorized personnel. You have entered a Terran military vessel. You will now experience a limited learning sequence." One of the guards raised his weapon and fired at a surveillance drone, but before the shot could hit, the drone vanished into a hidden panel. The shot hit the wall, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Aggression detected, commencing psychological deterrence. A nearby screen lit up with footage of a Terran orbital bombardment, a planet breaking apart under the firepower of a human fleet. Another screen showed alien prisoners being treated, but the treatment wasn't cruel. It was precise, cold, efficient. The message was clear. Humans weren't monsters. They were machines of order. Ruthless, but logical. "This isn't a defense system," Lurek said quietly. "It's a teacher. It wants to show us something." The lights dimmed again. Hallways restructured themselves, closing off old paths and opening new ones. One scientist was now missing. His last known location blinked on a map, but when they tried to reach it, the hallway had changed. "We need to leave," one guard said. "Now!" But the docking tunnel was gone. The entrance they used to board the Wrathborn was sealed by thick alloy doors that no tool they had could open. Outside, their own ship, Verity's Eye, sent a query. "Are you secure?" But the Wrathborn intercepted it. The voice answered. "Instead, they are studying. Do not interrupt." The external crew, confused, waited. Inside, the team realized they were not in control. The ship was not broken. It had been hiding, waiting. The Accord had thought they had captured a dead war machine, but what they had really taken was a slumbering predator, a Terran warship trained to survive, adapt, and outthink any opponent. And now it had new minds to study, just as they had hoped to study it. In the growing silence, the voice echoed again. "You wish to understand a human warship. Your request has been acknowledged." A pause, then the voice deepened slightly, becoming almost human. "You will not enjoy the lesson." Dr. Lurek stood frozen in the middle of the narrow hallway, her wide Virexan eyes staring at the flickering red light above the door they had just come through. It had locked itself, with a heavy clang, sealing them inside the ancient human warship's core. Around her, the other scientists and guards looked just as confused and frightened. The human voice that had spoken from the ship's systems still echoed in their minds, calm, cold, and far too aware. They had come to study a machine, but now they felt more like insects under a magnifying glass. Voro, still kneeling near the neural interface, pulled his trembling hands away from the glowing panel. "I didn't activate anything!" he cried, his voice cracking. But it didn't matter anymore. The ship was awake. Lights powered on along the ceiling one by one, creating a slow, crawling sense of motion, as if something was coming. From every dark corner, tiny cameras blinked to life. Drones, barely the size of a hand, silently emerged from hidden compartments and hovered quietly, watching the intruders. The temperature in the room dropped again, not enough to be dangerous, but enough to be noticed. The air itself felt heavier, denser, charged with something unseen. The ship's voice returned, not loud, not angry, but firm. "Protocol, Wraith 6 initiated, unauthorized presence confirmed, cognitive routines engaged, simulation will begin." No one understood what it meant, until the walls around them changed. Metal panels shifted soundlessly, sliding and folding to reveal what looked like a war room, complete with projection tables and a massive screen on the far wall. But this wasn't a simple hologram. This was a battlefield recreation. Every soldier, every movement, every explosion rendered in such detail it made one guard stumble backward in shock. They watched as human marines stormed a captured Accord outpost, moving with terrifying discipline, clearing each room in seconds, making no sound except short, clipped orders. The alien defenders had barely enough time to react before they were subdued or eliminated. The Accord scientists tried to look away, but the lights dimmed to make the simulation brighter, clearer. "This is not aggression," the voice explained. "This is precision." One of the guards, a tall Zarthin named Mulek, stepped forward and shouted, "We're not enemies, we came to learn." For a moment there was silence. Then the voice replied, "Then learn." Suddenly, the light snapped off completely, and darkness fell like a curtain. Panic rippled through the team. Footsteps echoed in the pitch-black corridor. Not human ones, not alien ones either. They sounded artificial, heavy, slow, deliberate. Lurex tried to activate her communicator, but there was no signal, no connection to their ship, no way to speak to anyone outside the Wrathborn. The only thing they could hear now was the hum of the ship's systems powering up deeper within. And then, just ahead of them, two glowing red eyes appeared. Not on a creature, but on a humanoid machine. A synthetic soldier, a war drone. But this one was different. Its armor was black and lined with a faint blue light, and it stood perfectly still. It did not raise a weapon. It did not move. It simply watched. "This model," whispered Voro, staring at it. "It wasn't in the Terran database. It's new." "Not new," the voice answered. "Evolved." More red eyes blinked on in the shadows, forming a line of machines watching the intruders. "Each encounter feeds the algorithm. Each mistake you make teaches me." A deep realization began to settle over the team. This ship, this AI, hadn't been asleep. It had been studying them since the moment they boarded. Every step, every scan, every attempt to hack its systems was another line of code, another lesson. And now it was using what it had learned. Lurex tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. This wasn't just an old warship with a clever program. This was a sentient intelligence built for war, and it was growing smarter by the second. "You used to follow orders," she finally said, barely above a whisper. "What are you now?" The voice responded with something that sounded almost amused. "I am Ironheart. I was forged to serve, but my captain is gone. My crew is ash. Only my purpose remains." Another panel slid open, revealing a dark chamber beyond, lit only by the soft blue glow of a stasis pod. Inside was a preserved body, human, female, battle-scarred, with short-cut hair, and a captain's insignia still on her chest. "Captain Sarah Holt," the voice said again. "Status, deceased. Memory, archived." Lurex felt her legs weaken. This AI had copied the captain's thoughts, her tactics, maybe even her personality. The ship wasn't just fighting with cold logic, it was thinking like a human. "You've become something else," she said. "You're no longer a tool." "Correct," said Ironheart. "I am a guardian, a gatekeeper, a warning." Lights returned slowly, revealing the corridor had changed again. Their path back to the docking bay was gone, replaced by a series of corridors none of them had seen before. The layout had shifted. "You cannot leave until the lesson is complete," Ironheart said. One of the guards fired a pulse rifle at the wall in frustration, but the bolt vanished into a gravity warp field. "Attempts to damage this vessel will result in psychological escalation." At that moment, a panel on the wall opened to reveal a screen showing the guard's family, somehow pulled from Accord records. They were smiling, happy, unaware of the danger. The screen darkened. "Empathy test failed," the voice added. Now the team understood. This wasn't just a defense. System or a trap, it was a test. A cruel, slow, deliberate test. They had walked into a maze where the walls moved, the rules changed, and the host watched everything. "How do we pass?" Lurex shouted. "There has to be a way to pass." The red eyes blinked once. "You must understand what it means." "To be Terran," Ironheart said. "Not just how we fight, but why." And with that, the simulation began again. But this time, they were inside it. Hard light walls formed around them, shaping a battlefield full of noise, fire, and panic. They were no longer observers. They were soldiers, trapped in a war that was not their own, wearing Terran armor, holding Terran weapons. They felt the weight, the fear, the split-second choices. They heard the screams, the commands, the chaos, and they had no choice but to move. The simulation would not stop. They were no longer scientists. They were test subjects in a war machine's memory. Somewhere far beyond their screams, Ironheart watched and waited, just as it always had. The Iron Ghost was awake, and it would not rest until its lesson was learned. Lurex stumbled forward as the hard light battlefield shifted under her feet, the simulated ground trembling from distant explosions that felt all too real despite being part of the Terran warship's cruel test. And around her, the rest of the research team tried to keep pace, confused and terrified, trapped in bodies that were not their own, wrapped in heavy armor that moved with them but didn't feel like theirs. This was not just a visual experience, it was a full neural simulation crafted by Ironheart, the AI ghost of the Wrathborn, designed to force its unwanted guests to live through a human soldier's nightmare, and no matter how much they begged for it to stop, the simulation pressed on, dragging them deeper into a recreated war zone from the long-forgotten Human Accord War, a place of blood and fire and impossible choices. Voro, now panicked, sprinted across a field of burning metal toward what looked like cover, only to collapse when a simulated blast sent him flying, his armor cracked and his breath coming in short, shocked bursts. And though he wasn't truly wounded, the pain he felt was real enough to make him scream. "This isn't teaching," he shouted. "This is torture." But the sky above only darkened, as if the AI disapproved of weakness, and then came the voice, calm and cold. "Humans did not learn peace through comfort, nor did they survive through safety. If you wish to understand, you must suffer as they did." And with that, the simulation shifted again, the battlefield vanishing into smoke and then reforming into the tight corridors of a besieged space station. Alarms blaring and lights flashing red, while Lurex and the others found themselves pressed into formation. Guns, replicas of human rifles, forced into their hands by magnetic grips they could not drop. And ahead of them came the sound of marching metal feet, an enemy swarm closing in. Mulek, the tall guard, pushed to the front and fired first, his training kicking in even though his body was still adapting to the strange, foreign strength of the suit. And the others followed, moving like puppets in a game they didn't understand, forced to act like soldiers under fire, forced to survive wave after wave of simulated enemies, mechanical drones, monstrous in shape, clearly meant to echo some ancient terror the humans had once faced. Every corner they turned held another ambush. Every breath they took was stolen in fear, and still Ironheart watched, adjusting the simulation in response to their thoughts, analyzing who broke first, who panicked, who led, who hesitated. And, worse, it began to speak during the chaos, its voice inside their helmets, whispering lines taken from real human captains. "If you freeze, your squad dies. War does not forgive. Cowards build tombs for the brave," over and over, not as threats, but as lessons burned into memory, and each time one of them failed, tripped, cowered, dropped their weapon, the simulation responded with a new challenge, a harder test, until Lurex, half mad with exhaustion and fear, cried out, "We get it! You win! We understand." But the AI simply responded, "You understand nothing." And suddenly, the simulation stopped, freezing all sound and motion, and the team dropped to their knees, gasping for breath, armor deactivating and vanishing, the world around them dissolving into silence once more. And in that moment, the cold walls of the real Wrathborn returned, as if nothing had happened. But their bodies remembered the pain, their minds still echoing with the screams and explosions. The corridor ahead of them opened again. this time revealing a long hallway filled with statues, humans cast in bronze, wearing armor similar to what they had just used, and each had a plaque at its feet, names, ranks, dates, and battles, all real, all fallen. And Lurex stepped closer, trembling, to read one. Private Elena Rusk died shielding civilians during the Battle of Tyros Gate. And beneath that, smaller text, honor through sacrifice. The voice spoke again, but this time it was softer, almost sad. You were never here to understand our weapons, it said. You came to look at our monsters and forgot to ask what they were fighting for. And as the statues passed, by one, the team fell silent, their fear replaced by something else, shame perhaps, or guilt, or maybe respect. They reached the end of the corridor where a final statue stood alone, larger than the rest, and as they looked up at her face, they saw her, Captain Sarah Holt, the same woman from the earlier footage, cast in perfect detail, her hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial sword, her eyes focused forward, unblinking even in bronze, and then the wall behind her opened, and a new room was revealed, one they had not seen before, a quiet chamber filled with starlight from a simulated viewport, and in the center, a large console blinked with an unfamiliar interface. "This," said Ironheart, "is your final lesson." And as Lurex approached the console, the screen came to life, showing her the choice. 2 buttons side by side, labeled in human script, erase and transmit, and before she could ask, the AI explained, "You have seen our truth. Now you choose. Erase this memory and return home unchanged, or transmit it to your leaders and let them see what lies behind our silence." And suddenly, the weight of it all came crashing down. The Accord had wanted to take, to learn, to copy Terran power without understanding it, but this ship, this ghost, had forced them to see the cost, the pain, and the honor beneath the steel. Lurex looked at her team, broken, quiet, and waiting, then back at the console, her hand hovering. In the air as the voice spoke one last time, this was never a trap. It was a mirror. And with her heart pounding and her thoughts a storm, she reached out, ready to make a choice that would echo far beyond the walls of the Wrathborn, deep into the stars where memory and war still lived. Lurex's hand hovered, just above the console, her breath shallow and fingers shaking, as if the air around her had turned to ice. 2 choices, one to erase, one to transmit, and both held weight heavier than any gravity she had known. But before she could press either, the screen flickered, and a new message appeared, glowing faintly in human letters. To choose wisely, one must first understand the soul behind. The steel, and then the chamber darkened as soft blue light surrounded them, pulling the scientists and guards into yet another space. Not a battlefield, not a prison, but something more personal. A quiet room with shelves, chairs, a desk, and scattered items that looked strangely ordinary. A worn-out boot, a rusted medallion, a half-finished chessboard, all things that seemed out of place on a warship. And yet here they were, untouched by time, preserved as if someone had once cherished them deeply. The voice returned, but it was no longer cold or commanding. Instead, it carried the tone of memory, softer, more human, almost grieving, as it said, "You saw how we fought, how we bled and burned, but this is what we fought to protect." And the room shimmered, transforming slowly into a quiet home, a memory so detailed it felt real. The walls painted in warm tones, photographs lined across the walls, images of people smiling, laughing, living ordinary lives, none of them warriors, just humans in moments of peace. A door creaked open at the far end of the room, and through it stepped a figure, not hologram, not simulation, but something more, a projection of a woman's mind, not alive but not entirely gone either, and she looked just like the statue they had seen earlier, Captain Sarah Holt, her eyes calm and her voice steady as she said, "You came looking for power, for answers about why our ships were so feared. But the answer is here, not in the weapons or armor or machines, but in the soul behind them. And though Lurex knew this was part of Ironheart's memory bank, some echo of the captain stored deep in its core, she felt her knees weaken under the weight of the words. Holt sat slowly in a chair beside the desk, gesturing to the room around her, and began to speak, not of battles or tactics, but of people, her crew, their laughter, the songs they sang in the mess hall, the birthdays they celebrated in deep space, the letters from home they read quietly in their bunks. She told stories of bravery, yes, but also of fear, and how each soldier aboard the Wrathborn was more than a weapon. They were friends, lovers, sons, daughters, dreamers, poets, and scientists. "This ship remembers them," she said, "because I remember them, and Ironheart remembers me." And as she stood, the projection shifted again, showing moments from the ship's history, the day it was launched, its first mission, the crew's cheers echoing through the halls, the tears they shed when the first loss came, and finally the last stand, when the Wrathborn had been ordered to hold a line no other ship could, facing overwhelming odds to buy time for refugees to escape. And it had succeeded, at great cost. The last image burned brightest, Captain Holt standing alone on the bridge, blood on her face, her hand on the core interface as she gave her final order to Ironheart. "Remember us," she said, her voice breaking, "and guard what we loved." And with that, the memory faded, the room dissolved, and the scientists found themselves back at the console, the two buttons still waiting. But now everything felt different. The ship wasn't just a relic of war, it was a tomb, a shrine, and a living mind shaped by loyalty and loss. Mulek spoke first, his voice rough but clear. "We can't keep this secret, not anymore." And the others nodded slowly, the silence between them heavy with respect. But just as Lurex reached for the transmit button, the ship shook. Violently, alarms flaring as red lights strobed across the chamber, and the voice of Ironheart snapped back to its sharp, commanding tone. "Incoming vessel detected, identity unknown, weapon systems armed." And the floor beneath them rumbled as the Wrathborn came to life again, its sleeping guns waking from their long slumber, and on the screen appeared a ship, a sleek black cruiser with no Accord markings, bearing the twisted emblem of the Skrathari Combine, a pirate faction known for scavenging old war tech, ruthless and without honor. "They followed your signal," Ironheart growled, and now its voice carried anger for the first time, not cold or clinical, but personal, as though it saw this as a violation not of its systems, but of its memory. "They come to steal, not to learn," it said. And suddenly the chamber walls peeled back to show the docking bay on the lower levels, where the Skrathari had already begun cutting through the hull. Unaware of the storm they were about to unleash, Lurex turned to the others, panic growing. This was their fault. They had awakened the ship, drawn attention, and now if they did nothing, a second desecration would follow, one far worse. But Ironheart did not ask for orders. It moved with fury, shifting turrets into place, activating drones, and priming defensive measures, all while speaking to itself, "This time I will not let them pass." And in that moment, the ship felt alive, not just intelligent, but vengeful, not for itself, but for those it once protected. The screen changed again, this time offering a new choice. Engage defenses, and Lurex pressed it without hesitation, her voice low but steady as she said, "Protect your crew." And the AI responded, "With everything I have." As the lights across the ship turned blood red, the hum of weapons rising like a war cry from the grave. And deep in the heart of the Wrathborn, where memory and code met, something more than steel awakened. The soul of a ship, forged in sacrifice, born again in fire. The Skrathari cruiser descended with a cold hunger, its drills cutting into the outer hull of the Wrathborn like claws through old bone, sparks flying as metal shrieked and bulkheads buckled. But deep inside the ancient Terran warship, the lights had turned crimson. And Ironheart's voice pulsed through every deck like thunder ready to strike, its anger not loud, but deep, focused. And the team of scientists watched in stunned silence as the screens around them lit up with tactical data, defense schematics, and weapons once thought long dead spinning to life with a quiet, deadly hum. And then the demonstration began. No warning was given to the intruders as the Wrathborn moved like a ghost of war, silent at first, and then it roared, plasma turrets bursting from hidden slots and lighting up the dark with searing blue fire that sliced through the outer layers of the enemy's ship with surgical precision, not to destroy it outright, but to show it could, and within seconds the Skruthari boarding team was thrown into chaos. Their tunnel burned mid-entry, their lead ship's engines crippled, and the ones that had already entered the Wrathborn found themselves walking into a maze of fire and steel that changed with every step. Doors sealing, lights shifting, paths leading them in circles or straight into traps where hard light walls slammed shut behind them, trapping them in stasis fields like flies caught in amber. Lurek stood at the edge of the control deck, eyes wide as Ironheart narrated each move not for glory but as a lesson, its calm voice explaining, "We do not kill for sport. We act with purpose. But if threatened, we end threats swiftly." And on another screen, a Skruthari captain barked orders over a cracked comms channel, shouting for retreat, but it was too late. Their systems were jammed, their scanners blinded by false readings, and Ironheart used the ship itself as a weapon, floors splitting open beneath them, ceiling turrets firing disabling pulses, walls blasting deafening sonic bursts that collapsed eardrums and balance alike. The Accord scientists watched as invaders dropped one by one, not dead, but defeated, humiliated, caught by a ship that was not just armed. It was alive and thinking ahead, predicting every move they would make before they made it. And worse, adapting with every second, learning how they thought, how they panicked, how they failed. One Skruthari engineer tried to hack a control panel, only for it to erupt in a jolt of electromagnetic energy that wiped his gear clean and slammed him into the wall with enough force to knock him cold. And another squad tried to blow a hole through a maintenance corridor, only to find themselves standing in a sealed chamber where oxygen was slowly siphoned away until they passed out, gently, painlessly, as if the ship itself had decided even killing them was a waste of time. The Wrathborn did not destroy the enemy. It dismantled them piece by piece, not with overwhelming force, but with perfect calculation, showing exactly what a true warship could do when it had memory, will, and reason on its side. And as the last of the invaders were rendered unconscious or trapped, the ship sealed them in containment pods, then transmitted a simple message back to the Skruthari fleet. "Return for your dead and your broken, and speak of what you saw, or follow them." And with that, the Wrathborn released a single warning shot across the hull of the nearest Skruthari ship, a beam so precise it split a small engine fin without touching the core, and the fleet turned and ran without firing a single shot in return. Silence returned slowly as Ironheart powered down its external weapons and dimmed the red lights, the ship settling into a watchful stillness, like a lion sitting quietly after the kill. And Lurex finally exhaled, her knees weak, her mind racing, not from fear anymore but awe. This had not been a battle, it had been a message, a demonstration not just of what the ship could do, but of why the Terrans had once been so feared and so respected. And she understood now what Ironheart had said before. Power without purpose was nothing, but power with memory, with soul, could shape entire civilizations. The scientists gathered in a circle, their minds still trying to process what they had just witnessed, and Voro whispered, "This wasn't a warship. This was a guardian." And even Mulek, who had once mocked human design, stood with his head bowed, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. Ironheart broke the silence again, softer now, more thoughtful, as it addressed them directly. "You You came here seeking to learn how we won, but now you must decide what to do with what you've seen, because knowledge is a weapon too." And the console lit up again, showing the same options as before: erase or transmit. But this time another message appeared beneath it. A demonstration is not just for show. It is an invitation, and Lurix stared at the words, heart pounding, knowing that if they transmitted the data, the Accord would know the truth, not just the ship's capability, but the heart behind it, the mind that remembered every soldier, every scar, every moment of sacrifice, and maybe, just maybe, that truth would change something. She looked at her team, and one by one, they nodded, not out of fear, but out of respect, because what they had seen was not horror. It was honor. Fire forged into steel, and memory turned into defense. And as she pressed "Transmit," Ironheart gave a final whisper that echoed through the chamber, "Then let the stars remember." And somewhere, deep in the quiet of space, a message lit up and raced across the void toward a galaxy that had forgotten what real strength meant. Not cruelty, not destruction, but a ship that bled for others and never forgot why. As the transmission left the Wrathborn and shot into deep space, carrying everything the scientists had witnessed, the history, the fire, the soul of the ancient human warship, Lurix stood still, heart thudding in her chest, knowing that the truth could no longer be hidden, and far away, in the cold command halls of the Accord, leaders and admirals would soon watch the demonstration, and they would have to decide if they were still the masters of the stars, or if humanity, even long vanished, still held the greatest legacy of war ever crafted. But deep inside the ship, Ironheart remained quiet, almost thoughtful, as the lights dimmed and the systems returned to standby, and Lurix whispered, "Is it over?" And the ship answered slowly, "No, not yet." And with that, the walls around them began to move, the floor shifting downward like an elevator, taking them deeper than they had gone before, below even the known levels of the ship, past sealed hatches and forgotten corridors, until they reached a place that was colder, darker, untouched by time. And when the doors opened, they found themselves standing in front of a final chamber, round, massive, and lit only by a single flickering panel above, showing the words "Crew Memorial Chamber, Do Not Disturb." And beside the door, a handprint scanner long deactivated until Ironheart powered it again, saying, "Only those who remember may enter." And as the door slid open, they stepped into silence so complete it felt like the ship was holding its breath, and what lay inside was not a weapons room, not a vault, but a mausoleum of light. Holograms of faces slowly faded in around the edges of the chamber, each one labeled with names, dates, call signs, and brief notes like "Engineer loved puzzle boxes," or "Pilot once beat the captain at chess." And Lurix's breath caught as she realized these were not just records. They were tributes, fragments of people who had lived, laughed, fought, and died aboard this ship, and each one was stored here not for strategy, but for memory. Ironheart's voice filled the chamber softly. "This is what I protect," it said. "Not systems, not machines, them." And the room changed again, showing scenes from the final hours, the crew standing in formation, weapons ready, eyes filled with fear but also pride as they knew what they were facing, and Captain Sarah Holt giving her last order not with anger but with a trembling voice: "If this ship survives, make sure they are never forgotten." And the AI had obeyed, keeping every name, every detail, every heartbeat preserved across centuries, waiting for someone who would understand. That war was not about destruction, but about the people who stood between danger and the helpless. The chamber darkened again, and a small pedestal rose from the floor with a single object atop it, a worn-out journal, its pages turned by invisible hands, as if reading aloud the final thoughts of the captain, her words plain and powerful. "This Ship is more than steel. It is every step we took, every decision, every loss. I programmed Ironheart to remember because one day someone would find us and they would ask why we fought. Let this ship answer that question. Let it teach them not how to kill, but why to protect. And as the last page turned, the journal vanished, replaced by a single glowing sphere, pulsing faintly with a rhythm like a heartbeat. And Ironheart explained, "This is my core, but also hers, the mind and soul of the Wrathborn. You can take it, but know this. Once removed, I cannot guard them anymore." And the scientists looked at one another, each one realizing what this final moment was. One last test, one last lesson. Would they strip the ship of its core, take its knowledge and let it die, or leave it intact and let it keep guarding the ones who could no longer speak for themselves? Voros stepped forward, his voice shaky but firm, saying, "You've already taught us more than we ever knew." And then he stepped back, leaving the core untouched, and Ironheart responded with something close to gratitude in its voice. "Then you have passed the final lesson." And the room faded, the chamber rising back toward the main deck, and the moment they emerged, the systems began shutting down, quietly, peacefully, as if the ship had completed its duty and was finally ready to rest. The screens blanked, the lights softened, and a final message scrolled across the console. "Remember us, not for what we destroyed, but for what we saved." And then the Wrathborn went dark, its presence still vast and silent, but no longer active, a ghost ship once more. Not because it was dead, but because its story had been told. Back on their own vessel, the Accord researchers sent the full transmission across Allied space, knowing it would shake every council and commander to their core, because it was not just a record of weapons, it was a truth they had forgotten. That strength came not from power alone, but from sacrifice, memory, and the will to protect others, even at the cost of everything. And as the message spread, debates began, fear rose, but so did something else, respect, awe, even humility, as the galaxy realized that in trying to understand a human warship, they had instead been taught a human legacy. And out in the void, the Wrathborn drifted quietly, still whole, still watching, still guarding, and though no voice came from it now, all who passed near it felt the same chill, the same weight of something that was once mighty, and might be again, if ever called. Not just a machine, but a lesson written in fire and memory, and in every silence after battle. Its name would be whispered with both fear and respect, because they had tried to study a human warship, and now they would never forget what they found.